There were other rules and other things that happened. What was the colonial response to the Coercive Act, dear Melissa, or the Intolerable Acts? I'll put this one finger up, one finger. Go ahead. The First Continental Congress. Delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies convened in Philadelphia. Now, when they convened in Philadelphia in September of 1774, did they, Kate Leonard, categorically, absolutely say, this is it, we are declaring ourselves independent? No, they did not. They wanted the Intolerable Acts to be repealed. Right? They passed a series of resolutions called the Sussex Revolutions, Suffolk Revolutions, that said that Britain couldn't do or shouldn't do what they were doing. But they also encouraged each colonial area to arm itself in case they needed to fight for their rights. And at this point, that's what they were arguing they were fighting for. Not for independence, but Kelly KU for their rights. Right? Now, they also said in September of 1774 that they would meet again in May of 1775 or sometime in the future if they needed to, which indicates to us that colonial Americans would have been content in 1774 to go back to the way things were prior to 1763. That if they could turn back the clock to salutary neglect, they would have been content to remain part of the British Empire. They were still giving deference to the king. They liked being British. What their argument is that the British Parliament and eventually the king were violating their rights as free-born British subjects, and that their actions actually sort of constituted a level of enslavement. Now, in the aftermath of the First Continental Congress, the commander, the governor, that's a spider that just came out of nowhere. Don't fear it. Gone. Don't fear it. I did it for you. I was afraid of the spider bite. Yeah. So anyways, it just came out of nowhere there. For the cyber audience, I don't know, that's not characteristic of Gateway High School. In response to the First Continental Congress, the governor of Massachusetts, now the military commander as well, General Gage, was ordered to go out and arrest the main rabble-rousers of sort of the Bostonians who had perpetrated the Boston Tea Party and now continued to sort of stir discontent. And those two people were John Hancock and Samuel Adams. Gage organizes an army. And in the dark of night on April the 18th, the morning of the 19th, he will march his troops, some under the command of Major John Pitcairn, if you recall, will eventually engage some of the colonists on Lexington Green, right? So on Lexington Green, on the morning of the 19th, shots were fired, later immortalized as shots heard round the world that were fired on that green on that day. And we said that even when those shots were fired and there was the shedding of blood, the aftermath of Concord and Lexington, the battles that ensue there, and which results in loss of life for both sides, do not lead to independence. What it does lead to is the convening of the Second Continental Congress. In the Second Continental Congress, the debate is what to do. What do we do? What do we do? And I showed you that video of John Adams and sort of the debate in the Second Continental Congress. And there was a growing faction of people in the Second Continental Congress that said, we have no choice but to seek independence. But there were still conservatives, mainly from the middle colonies, that said, wait a minute, this is a big step. This will be devastating. And you kind of saw that debate there. As a concession to the conservatives, the Congress passed something called the Olive Branch Petition. And the Olive Branch Petition was a sort of appeal to the king, which incidentally the king refused to even read. Prior to the Olive Branch Petition even arriving in England, the king had declared the colonies in a state of rebellion and was in the process of hiring Hessian mercenaries to go and put it down. That Second Continental Congress is also going to take military action by appointing George Washington to command all American forces that oppose sort of the king and Parliament. And they also draft up a significant document that is written by Thomas Jefferson called The Causes and Necessities of Taking Up Arms. Now, Samantha, the significant thing about the causes and necessities of taking up arms is it says these are the causes, this is why we're doing this, but they do not say they are doing it to seek independence. Now, this is in the summer of 1775. Now, throughout the summer and fall, and really, the Second Continental Congress will be in continual session until the war ends, and then really remains in session because the Second Continental Congress ultimately just morphs into Congress under the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles of Confederation, basically, the Second Continental Congress becomes the central government of the United States. Can I point this out to you, Tina? That the Second Continental Congress actually had no legal standing. I mean, it's not recognized by anybody. No one recognized that besides the colonists themselves. Britain didn't recognize it. At this point, France didn't recognize it. Holland didn't recognize it. These were just people who met together and proclaimed themselves the Congress of the United 13 Colonies. They didn't even know what they wanted to do. They didn't have necessarily an organized military. They didn't have money. They didn't have a currency. They didn't have a system of central government. I mean, it is amazing to think that these people would eventually decide that we are going to challenge the greatest empire on the planet in order to establish our independence. And the likelihood of them being successful is, I mean, if you thought about it, if you evaluate it, you wouldn't think that it would be very good. Now, what's kind of the thing that we said significantly convinces more and more Americans that independence is the only route? What's the big event? Does anybody remember? I don't even know if you call it an event. Does anybody remember what? Go ahead, Joy.
Common sense.
Oh, you were happy to say that. You love Thomas Paine's Common Sense, do you not? Right? And who doesn't love Thomas Paine's Common Sense? Common Sense was published by the oftentimes called the British radical Thomas Paine, recently arrived there, writes this pamphlet that is widely read and widely distributed and read to lots of people that argues it only makes common sense that America should be independent. In the aftermath, and that was January of 1776, in the aftermath of Common Sense, the tide turns quickly towards independence. So much so that in June of 1776, Richard Henry Lee makes the fateful proposal that these colonies are and ought to be independent. Now, after that fateful proposal is made, it is tabled for a time so that a committee is sent to draft a declaration in case the resolution was eventually approved. That declaration was going to be the Declaration or Explanation of Independence. We know that committee was largely made up of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin. And that we know that Thomas Jefferson is going to be the principal drafter of the document. And we also know that Jefferson said when he drafted that document that he did not turn to any sort of text or anything like that. But what he did was sort of try to express what people were saying, thinking, and feeling. And he does so in a document that is edited by Adams, it is edited by Franklin, it is eventually edited by the Congress, and then passed on July the 2nd, I think, or July the 3rd, no, July the 3rd, 1776, and then announced to the world on July the 4th, 1776. Just for fun, Courtney, and I know I'm going to conclude, but I've got a flow here. I've got a flow, and I want